we will get moving. Let's talk a minute about this week. I just talked to the folks in Cleveland about how I was keeping up with the grades. I'm doing a spreadsheet since Moodle is not working completely, so that I'm trying to capture everything in one place. What I will do, and hopefully today I'll have your grades finished for last week, I'm going to send you individually an email with your grades that I have for each thing, okay? That doesn't mean that it can't be fixed if there's a problem, and I expect you to talk to me if there's a problem. Don't just assume something is the way it is, and you know, we can work on anything as long as you'll ask and let me know. But then I'm going to send all those grades to them for the week. If you will look at your syllabus when you get a chance, it gives you the percentage of each thing. The quizzes count 10% each, so that's 30% of your grade. The participation counts 10%, so that's 40. That makes a total of 40. And then your discussion boards are what I'm calling in-class work. There's 6 of those, and then there are 6 homework and case studies. There'll be 6 of those. Those are 30% each. So what will happen is we'll get an average for the 6 of those times 30%, 6, you know, average of, and so everything will be averaged and multiplied by the percentage. What I confirmed this morning with the participation, I don't like this arbitrary business of, oh, you talk 2 times, you talk 3 times. That's ridiculous, and it's not something I want to keep up with. So we're going to use a rubric that I use in my online classes that involve things like professionalism, being on time, getting your work in, and I'm going to send that over to you after the class. I'll email you a copy of that rubric, so you will know exactly what that 10%, that's 100 points total. But that is something that is definite, that you got in your hand, that you know that you can get your points for, and it's not, oh, the teacher thought this or he missed that or whatever. That's not a great way to grade anybody. So that way you don't have to worry about, well, I talked 5 times today and 3 times tomorrow. I do want you to talk and continue to communicate like we've done, and I really enjoy our interaction, but I don't want you to feel like you're under the gun and have to do that to get a point for it. So I want us just to learn and grow, and I think it's helpful, especially in ethics, it's helpful for us to be able to discuss things and talk about them, and kind of get to gauge what other people are thinking about things and see where you are as far as how you will be working in your profession when you leave here, and how to be professional. That's a huge thing that, and I think writing's a part of that. As part of your professional skills that you should be learning is how to communicate, how to write. And so we do a lot of those different kind of things in this class. Any feedback on that? Comments?
I just wanted to ask a question. I see that when I looked on Moodle yesterday, I see that there's 2 extra quizzes or something. Now, are those just a video on how to take the quizzes, or?
There's one a week is the quiz. Now I did add yesterday, I added the Constitution Day, and I meant to mention that tomorrow on Thursday is Constitution Day. So they ask us to include a video and a little quiz on that. That's extra credit. It'll be extra points for you. So that will go off. That isn't something that you can fail or whatever. You just watch the video, and there's 8 questions off the video. But that was just something that the school added to celebrate Constitution Day. So that's what those 2 are.
Okay, I was wondering. I'm like, when did these pop up on here?
Yeah, well, they had me to put it on for Thursday. So, but your regular quizzes will be part of your grade, and that's open book. So, you know, you should be doing pretty well on those. And then participation should appear in your last week. Nick's supposed to put that up today, so I can go through and do the rubric for that. But I'll send you over that rubric so you can look at it on paper of what that looks like, and that's your participation grade. Anybody else? I keep kind of hanging around this morning. We're missing some people, so I was seeing if they're going to show up. Anybody else have a question or comment, or you're unclear? Remember, what you see in Moodle is may not reflect your final grade. If you have emailed me stuff, I have a spreadsheet beside that. So when I send you over your final grading, that will be from my spreadsheet. That may not match Moodle at all. But the ones on Moodle that I could grade, I went through and gave points for. So you'll see a partial setup for that. And then you will, but what I send you over would be what I'm going to send to Cleveland for your grades for week 1. So if you have any issue with those, please let me know as quickly as you can so that we can, I can get it fixed before I send it over. And I'll give you a deadline, like, I may send it over, well, this is Wednesday, maybe I'll send it at lunch tomorrow. So if you'll get back in touch with me before lunch, we can fix that. Okay, is that fair enough? Nobody's talking this morning. Are we all taking a nap?
Everyone's sleeping
No,
this
that's
morning.
fine.
Okay. If you get to take a nap, I get to take a nap. I told you about the teacher that died during the Zoom class last week in front of his kids. And it was kids too, it was young people, and they're all doing.
Oh my God, that is horrible.
And he died right on camera. So hopefully that's not me. It is terrible. Yeah, you think it's not enough trauma in your child's life having to go to school online, then of course that comes along and adds to it. Okay, we'll keep our eye open for our late people to class and go ahead and start we're talking about chapter number 9 today. And I hope you will go back and look at this chapter. I think you will find it very helpful. It's on feminism and feminist thoughts in the ethics of care. And we're going to talk about a couple of interesting things that I really want your feedback on today when we talk about this that I think will be useful. There have been a lot of studies. A few years ago, there's a young lady in Pakistan called Malala Yousafzai who actually won the Nobel Prize. And she got shot in the head by the Taliban for wanting to go to school. And you will find this in a lot of Muslim countries where the way they treat women is just atrocious, and they don't want women to get an education, and they want, we kind of relegate that to a foreign country, but I'm thinking that more and more in your healthcare profession, that we're going to meet people that have different religious and cultural traditions that you're going to run up against. And so I think that's why this class is extremely important to talk about treatment of women and how they are, and we have that in our own society. So one of the things that I have studied in my career as a history teacher and a pastor is fundamentalist religion in general. Now, when we say that, we normally will say, oh, that's Islam. No, it's not just Islam. It is unique to monotheistic religions, or religions that believe just in one God. You don't find fundamentalist Buddhists or Hindus or Sikhs or anything else, but you do find fundamentalist Christians and fundamentalist Jews and fundamentalist Muslims. The interesting thing about them is they all come from the same root. They used to call them the people of the book because they're all three have their roots in the Bible in the Old Testament. If you remember, Isaac, the son of Abraham in the Old Testament, became the starter of the Jewish nation. His son by Hagar the handmaid, Ishmael, became the starter of the Arab nations from which Muhammad came, and Islam, and then Christians, of course, are offshoots of the Jewish religion. I can say a lot about that fundamentalism, but we have all three of those in our own society. They all have these dress codes and treatment of women. I think I told you one of the reasons why I left the pastorate. I grew up in fundamentalist Christianity, and I just got tired of the way women were treated. They're not in the Baptist church. Many of them are not allowed to preach. They're not allowed to be deacons. They're not allowed to be leaders. They can't wear pants. Can't wear makeup sometimes. Can't wear jewelry. All these don't, stuff. But in a hospital situation, you might even run into some form of Christianity. Like I think it's Seventh-day Adventists that don't allow blood transfusions. We talked about that. But then there are other things like, you know, male nurses treating female patients when they're in one of those groups can pose a problem. Or, you know, there are religious groups that are racist. And so you're going to find racism anywhere. Religion has a lot to do with racism. And religion, I think, and I'm saying this as a former pastor, I think the reason that we haven't made more progress on racial issues sometimes has to do with religion. That Christians don't stand up for truth, and they don't get out, and they'll march over something stupid, but they won't march over something important. To me, things like Black Lives Matter, that's important. That's where I need to show up, you know. As a white pastor, I need to be leading my people to change, not to keep the status quo. Well, you're going to see those same kind of things in the medical field, where, you know, you've got all these things to deal with. And so I think it's good for us to think about feminism today and how women are treated. You need to be aware of it. Some of you may have encountered this. And it's not just in white churches either. I mean, there are some African-American churches that I've preached in that are very, very fundamentalist this way. Are there, you know, all kind of congregations to think about. But feminism your author says that feminism is just another word for equality. When women aren't treated equally, then you have all these problems that you have to deal with. Women as property. If you know anything about the Mormon Church in Utah, there are forms of Mormonism that allow polygamy, and they can have as many wives as they want. Ladies, could you imagine living in a situation where you were a plural wife? And I mean, there's a guy.
Oh my gosh, no.
There's a guy in prison now for polygamy that had 17 wives and 36 children. And you know, in Islam, you can have multiple wives, but the Quran says that you have to treat them all equally. Now, is that possible? I mean, is it possible to treat everybody the same? I don't think so. So, you know, there are all kind of situations that go along with that. But anyways, so when it comes to principles of equality, you know, it wasn't that long ago that in the United States, a lady was not allowed to inherit property. She was not allowed to vote, of course. She didn't get the right to vote until 1921. Not allowed to sit on a jury. That comes from an old Judeo-Christian background. If you know anything about religion, who do we blame for most of the work for getting us in the mess we're in? When it comes to most Christians look back at Adam and Eve, right? And Eve, because she supposedly sinned in the Garden of Eden, caused the whole world to fall into sin. So if you look at religion all down through the years, they blamed the woman for that because she was the weaker sex. She was not, she couldn't be trusted because she listened to the devil. And you might think, well, that's a very small thing, but I can trace that line of thinking from all the way down through, especially Western history. And Islam has an element of that in it as well, that women are the weaker sex, they're to be controlled. If you were a wife in, say, Saudi Arabia, you wouldn't be able, they just got the right to drive in Saudi Arabia, which has been a major women's rights issue. In order to protest their lack of freedom, women used to steal their husbands' cars in Saudi Arabia and go driving around the city. Well, in recent years, they've been given the right to drive, but then they can't get driver's license because they can't pass the test. So they find ways to enforce this lack of freedom. But religion, it always kind of has this mantra, but it's about freedom and about equality. Comments, questions, statements?
So you're saying in Saudi Arabia today, they have the right to drive, but they're really not capable of
Well,
getting a driver's license?
they find ways to keep. Look in the old South at the same principles in Jim Crow. They gave black men the right to vote in 1865, but then they put on it a requirement that you had to be able to read or you had to be able to sign your name. So they effectively found ways to keep people from voting. Well, it's the same thing in these other countries in that, you know, that we'll give you the right to drive because it looks good to the international community. Oh, we're making progress and we're moving forward. But then when a lady goes to get her driver's license, oh, you failed the test, you know, and so you can always set the test up to keep women from doing what you've just given them the right to do. So it's smoke and mirrors, basically. In most Muslim countries, a woman cannot show skin in public, and you may have seen the burqa that women have to wear. Their hands are covered, their ankles are covered, their heads covered, and they got this little slit that they can look through to walk. And they're not allowed to show their beauty to any other man but their husband. And so they have to wear that in public, and they have to have a minder. They have to have a male member of the family to drive for them, to go with them, to be sure that they're not misbehaving. And
Don't they gotta have a male with them just to go outside?
yeah, to go anywhere. You can't go out of the house without a minder, as they call it.
And they have to, and don't they have to stay
Wow.
like 2 feet behind them?
Yeah, they have to maintain distance. You know, it wasn't. I'll tell you something funny. In the 30s and 40s in America, groups like the Baptist, you couldn't go on a date just two people. You had to have a chaperone with you, and the chaperone had to sit between you in the car. And you weren't. You know, that's why most people, my mom and dad, met at church, and church became the place where you met. You went to look for a husband or a wife, but those rules, the religious rules, what's really funny is when you study American Christianity, you realize there's not a whole lot of difference between what we used to do in America as Christians and what the fundamentalist Islam does today to their women. You know, they don't get to be priests, or there are no women clergy in Islam. And so they don't get to lead in the church. And they say when you go to a Muslim church service, there is a screen, and women sit behind the screen totally hidden from the men, because that way they're not distracting the men from their religious duties. So, I mean, there's some really, really interesting stuff that goes on in the name of religion, but women don't have any rights. Within the last year, one of the Saudi princess's wives actually escaped from her husband and flew to London and got protection. But and we'll talk about this in a minute, but they practice honor killing. So if that woman has dishonored her husband by running away, she'll probably end up assassinated before it's over.
So what happens to the man if he dishonors his wife?
Well, that's not a two-way street. You know,
Oh my.
you know that a man could not, a woman could not get a divorce in this country until the last 30, 40 years, because, you know, and she couldn't be on a jury. She couldn't be, because she was not, and if they did give her a divorce, the man always got the children.
Wow.
We're not that far away from those kind of crazy ideas. I mean, most people don't think about it, but we're not.
Well, you got to think that in America, besides, like, you know what I'm saying, what's over there in the Mideastern, you know what I'm saying? They just looked at it as men was superior.
Mm-hmm.
Superior, right?
Well,
right.
and they did that in Christianity. I mean, we're living in probably the most progressive times in American religion that we've ever seen. I mean, go back and think about the Puritans. Yeah, you might have read the Scarlet Letter in high school. Remember that story? And that lady got pregnant, and she wasn't married, and had to wear that scarlet A on her forehead. And come to find out, the preacher was the one she committed adultery with. But the man got off. He didn't have to pay for that, but the woman did. And that was American religion. In my younger days, divorce was absolutely the unpardonable sin. If you were divorced, you couldn't lead in silent prayer in the church, and you were a fallen woman. If you divorced your husband, you were just a fallen. It was the woman's fault, and she was considered to
So,
be, you know.
so did they like I can't find the word for it, but like did they basically banish you from the church if you did something like that? Like
I'll tell you
a
something funny.
female?
I'll tell you something funny. My grandmother used to sing with this lady. They would sing in church, and this lady married a guy. Her husband had died, so she was free to remarry, but she married a guy who had a living wife. And my grandmother refused to sing with this lady. And the preacher came to her house, tried to talk her in. She said, no, she said, those are my principles. Said, you used to have principles. What happened to you? And she told the preacher that. And she would not sing with the lady because she felt like it was endorsing that lady's sin. But to have a child out of wedlock, you would be turned out of the church. And
That was like, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, you're fine.
I was like, that was like, it was frowned upon to be living with each other and not being married.
Oh yeah, but it was a little more acceptable than being divorced. But it was, you would be turned out of the church for. I mean, that happened in my own ministry. I had a great lady whose husband was an absolute drunk, and he got killed in an accident. And she got sick and had to have surgery. And the guy she was dating moved in to take care of her. And her uncle went to her. I had nothing to do with this as a pastor. I didn't even know it happened until after the fact. And he went to her and told her, said, you're not coming back to church when you're living in sin. Said, if you're going to live with him, you're not going to bring that mess to church. And that all happened without me even knowing it as the pastor. But I mean, that was strongly, those are strong. I mean, you can get murder would be more acceptable than divorce.
Right.
Because marriage is looked at as you're making a promise to God that you're going to live together forever, you know. And my grandmother actually believed that if you divorced and remarried, to go to heaven, you had to leave that second husband or wife and go back to the first one because that's the only one God recognized. I mean, could you imagine the mess? But those kind of things, the woman's always the one without the freedom, and it's still not a perfect world, is it? I mean, do you still see some of these things go on in our society? That woman even it doesn't have equal rights in the workplace because she generally will make less money doing the same job as a man with the same education, and she won't make the same money in lots of places.
Totally sad.
It is sad. I mean, there's a lot of things to be changed, you know, and to work on. We have a lot of things to work on in this country, but think about it's a blessing at least that here we do see a little change. But when you go to other countries, they've been that way for thousands of years, and they're not about to change. Any other comments on the freedom issue or the equality? And realize that the Equal Rights Amendment, most of you weren't around then, but we had women's history in this country is interesting. Abigail Adams, John Adams' wife, back in the Revolution, sends him a Dear John letter and says, you know, when you're giving people these rights, why don't you consider the women that dressed in men's clothes and picked up a gun and went out and helped you fight the British, or followed the army around and cooked and cleaned and washed and bandaged. And he, of course, passed over her, you know, and ignored her. But women's rights, they get the right to vote in 1921, and you ought to look up women's suffrage and read about that. Every woman ought to know that date because that was a great day in their history. But in the 60s and 70s, when we're having all the troubles with Vietnam War and we're trying to get civil rights changed, all those things, women rose up again and started protesting, burning their underwear in public as a sign of protest. And we got the Equal Rights Amendment through Congress, and which gave women and men equal rights, and it failed. It had to be endorsed by 2/3 of the states within a period of time, and the Equal Rights Amendment failed. And it was other women who caused it to fail, religious women. In fact, the lady that was responsible for that, I'm trying to think of her name. She just died last year, but she led the conservative Christian women's movement against the Equal Rights Amendment, because they said if women get equal rights, then they're going to have to go to the war and be a soldier. They're going to, they're not going to have any distinctions as women, all these things. Well, this stuff happened anyway. I mean, there are more women in the military now than we've ever had. But the Equal Rights Amendment failed in the sense that women still don't have equal pay or anything. The book mentions a couple of statistics I wanted to mention in passing. 1 in 5 women will be sexually assaulted while in college. 1 in 9 teenage girls will be forced to have sex. 1 in 10 teens will be hurt on purpose by somebody that they're dating. Do you realize the domestic violence rate in this country? We were talking about Cleveland a few minutes ago, where there's high crime. It would be interesting to look at the domestic violence rate and see if that's not also extremely high as well. Because people tend to get away with that because of women not having freedom. They don't have financial freedom, economic freedom. So sometimes they're stuck in relationships and don't have anywhere to go. And think about the numbers of women that are being abused like that by men. And there are, on the other side of that coin, there are men, believe it or not, who are abused by women. We miss the fact that there's two sides of that coin, because men have this macho image of, oh, men never put up with that, but they do. And so, those are things you're going to face in healthcare. You're going to have women or men maybe come in that are battered. How do you handle that? Knowing what your limitations are. I mean, there again, we talk about personal freedoms and things that our patients will have. How would you handle, say, a lady who would be the most common come in that showing signs of being abused? And where do you draw the line?
You said, can you repeat that, the first part of the question?
I said, if you had a patient, say you work in an ER, okay, and you had a lady who came in that you suspected that she was being abused by her husband, ethically, where do you draw the line with that? How can you get her help if she doesn't want help, or can you get her help if she doesn't want help?
If the husband wasn't standing by her or in the room with her, I would, talk to her first of all and ask her if these things was going on. If it was visible to me, I would feel that I would have the need to get involved, because if I didn't, as a medical professional, one of the first questions is they ask you when you go to the doctor, are you safe at home? And if I feel that person wasn't safe at home, of course, yes, I would most definitely, get authorities involved. But you have to think of it as through their point of view as well. If I do get someone involved, they have to go back home to that person. So what's going to be the outcome, if I did get one involved? So it's just a two-way street for me with that. Of course, I would want to help, but I still think in the back of my mind, if this person has to go back home with this abuser, what are they going to endure when they go back home? Especially if they find out that the police or someone has been involved. And I don't know, it's just a two-way street.
Well, and these are well within this purview of ethical questions, right? That we have to. And now with children, if you suspect they're abused, we don't have a choice.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to. I mean, as a teacher, because we can be charged with a crime if we fail to report. But with an adult, it's a kind of a different scenario. But ethically, I think every one of us would want to be involved. But
like we got a duty to report.
Yeah. Well, and I think another safeguard that would be helpful is to bring your supervisor in on the issue and get a different perspective. Maybe we get too personally involved with that and get caught up. I think it's always good to have a check and a balance there. What do you think about that?
I agree. I agree.
That way the decision is not completely yours, you know, and I think the more people you can get involved, especially visibly seeing what you're seeing, you've got a witness, you got witnesses to do that, and then let somebody in a position of a supervision make the call, and you've done your due diligence, you've reported, and you know, it's at some level, depends on what level you're at. If you get to be, you know, a supervisor and an RN at some point, then you do, that's your job. You make those kind of calls, you know, seriously. But I think it's interesting to think about that. Another thing about our society that not directly related to our professional thing, but our cultural obsession with female beauty and body image. You see a lot of and you'll see this in your medical practice as well. Women that are either bulimic or, you know, that are caught up in this psychological rat race of what is beautiful. And there are a lot of people that die every year, especially young women who die from these kind of eating disorders that are driven by body image, it's driven by psychological uh, images, and everything we look at. You'll see a lot of things to read about this today, but everything you look at is about what is beauty. You know, look at a runway model. You don't ever see a 300-pound runway model, right? I mean, they're the ones that are so skinny that they can turn sideways and disappear because they are starving themselves to death uh, to be in that position. You'll see that if you're in nursing in certain areas before long. You'll see this obsession with body image and all those things that, and it's the eating disorders today are an epidemic, and you know, all this deal of cosmetic surgery, you know, trying to be that beautiful person, uh, you know, that kind of drives a lot of the psychological stuff when we talk about feminism. Pornography, of course, is another new thing. We talk about female genital mutilation in Africa. Those are all things about women's bodies being controlled. I mentioned the honor killing in some countries and cultures. When a woman's done something that the culture considers shameful, the male members of her family feel justified in killing her. And in some places, rape is punished by killing the woman who has been raped, or by forcing the rape victim to marry the rapist. That's not uncommon in other cultures, and in our own culture. In the past, when a woman gets pregnant, it wasn't unusual for her family, to force the guy who got her pregnant to marry her. And you still find a whole lot of people that were forced to marry in the South. I don't know about the North, but anyway, so this idea of honor killing, and they'll go to any length to do that. Many young Muslim girl might come here, if she does get to come here to go to school, and she falls in love with a non-Muslim, her brothers may come and kill her for that, because it's bringing dishonor to the family. So the idea of feminism and ethics is interesting. It's an intellectual commitment, and it's also a political movement that seeks justice for women and the end of sexism in all forms. And sadly, you will encounter that, I'm sure, if you haven't already in your professional life, that women sometimes, some people treat them badly, and it's just a form of sexism. One thing I wanted to mention in passing is, do you think there's a difference in ethical or moral thinking? Is there a difference between the sexes in the way men and women think about issues?
Yes.
I mean, there have been a lot of studies about what women feel like are morally required of them and compared to what men think. And if there's a different moral logic between the two sexes, and if they have different kinds of ethics. Now, we realize that certain ethics will be the same, but distinctive differences in the way we think. Anybody want to say something about that, or?
I just know that it's recently been okay for women to go out and get high payroll jobs. Like it wasn't a thing back then. It was like a social society of men where women weren't able to be in a power position. Like it wasn't, they weren't able to be CEOs or a Fortune 500 companies. They weren't able to be, like I guess lawyer partners of higher firms. It just kind of became okay in like the last maybe 50, 60 years where that's okay for a woman to run a company or be in a higher position.
Well,
Is getting
it was as early as last week that the first woman was elected as CEO of a Fortune 500 company.
Y'all think too much emotions.
I'm sorry?
It was because women think too much with their emotions, and they
Well,
felt like they have the capacity to pull in necessary word to pull a trigger on something because somebody might give you a sob story and you get emotional attached to something. So it's a lot of.
But it's a lot of women. It's a lot of women, Darnell, that
I'm not saying. Oh, believe me, I'm not saying that y'all not capable of it. I'm just telling y'all. I'm just saying like that's how they thought.
Well, I think that was the excuse stuff with the lie. You know, if you want to keep somebody from getting somewhere, you spin the story. You spin this story. If you tell people, look at our government. If they tell us a lie long enough, we finally start believing it.
Absolutely.
And I think we see a lot of that today. And I'm not trying to get into politics, but you tell a lie long enough, and somebody will believe it. And I think there are psychological differences in good ways between men and women. And the book gives you a really good chart on female and male ethical perspectives. I think, as Darnell said, women are much more personal and empathetic generally than men in their dealings with people. They have their heart. They do think with their heart, but they can also think with their head. It's not that they don't think with their head. It's just that they have a heart for people and problems. And men have this macho image that they don't care too much of the time. But I think women are a little more private and men a little more public. If you listen to men, they'll tell you everything they think up front, but women sit back and listen and think. And I think that they don't get a lot of credit for it, but I think that gives them the better judgment.
Yeah, I think that's some of the reasons why it's hard for a woman to be president, because they also, like Darnell said, feel like they just think emotionally before, it could be a bad day. They're on their menstrual cycle and they like off with their head. We're starting a war. I don't know. I think that's how they think, but I don't see it that way though. I feel like a woman should be able to have an opportunity.
Well, look at the great women leaders that we've had in the world, and there again we go back to the reason that we haven't had those in America so much is I think religion has held them back, and that we've told these things so long about that religious viewpoint. Well, they're the weaker sex, and look what Eve did, and women are the weak. They're much more likely to think with their heart and not their brain. I mean, we tell people that long enough, then you say, well, maybe women aren't able to do that. That's a lie. And I think the devil has perpetuated that. But look at, Margaret Thatcher in England was a phenomenal prime minister. Or, the lady in Germany now, she's been the longest leader of Germany they've had, Angela Merkel. The lady in India. And we're a lot, and we talk about being civilized. We're way ahead of some countries in some things, and they look at us as more civilized, and yet they're way ahead of us in women's being able to have positions of trust and power. And we've had a few. I mean, we've had some great secretaries of state. I mean, that are women. I think Hillary Clinton did a good job. I think what the Rice lady under Bush, she got her belly full of politics with that one thing. They tried to get her to run for president. She said, "There's no way in hell that I'm running for president." But she was a great Secretary of State. Madeleine Albright was excellent. So I hope that's changing for the better. I think the lady that's running as vice president with Biden is a brilliant lady. And I think she would make a good president. But so we'll see, you know, hopefully that will be change that we can hold on to and be encouraged by. But women do, you know, there have been all kind of tests, and your book talks about this, but I think women have an easier time of caring. You know, that doesn't say that men can't be good nurses, but they tend to, women have this heart for people, and there are a lot of men that have a heart. So I'm not trying to disparage that at all. So read through what the book says about that and the differences between gender and morality, and see what you think about that. All it does, I don't think it really comes to a conclusion other than to say that they have studied that. And I go back and read Sigmund Freud quite a lot, and he does a lot of work years ago on the difference between the male and female personalities and mindsets, and where that comes from and how that develops over time. And so I think it's worth noting that. If you get to take a psychology class, is that in your curriculum at all? That's probably one of the most useful classes you can ever take. I teach the one that Valley does, and I set it up my undergrads in psychology. But if I had to trade my entire education for one class, it would be a class in psychology. Just thinking how people's minds work and how they think and how they operate is very, very helpful, and will be helpful to you in and also a class in abnormal psychology, because you will run into every kind of person you can think of, depending on what clinical setting you're in, and being able to recognize deep-seated psychological and clinical issues will go a long ways toward helping you to deal with people as well. Any questions, comments? Remember, tomorrow we're doing 2 sessions. We will do our regular 9 o'clock session. We will take a break and we'll come back maybe at 11 and do the other one. So I hope you can be around for both of those. We're making up the session for Labor Day that we missed. Any closing words?
No.
It was just an interesting topic today. You just get a lot of insight, you know, on things that you know already.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, when you just put a lot of things in perspective, my face just dropped on a lot of stuff, because it was a lot of stuff that I did know, but it was a lot of stuff that I did not know. And it was, I don't know, it's just shocking.
Well, and putting it in the context of what you're going to do as a profession is another thing. You know, we know a lot of things, as you said, but then we think about, well, I may have to deal with this in a year or 2 years with patients, and it's a reality to them. What is in a book today for us will be a reality tomorrow. When you run into someone who's, you know, walking in those shoes, as my grandmother would say, it puts a face on it, you know, and I think that's helpful. That's what I told the lady from Cleveland yesterday, that I think we've made great progress in this class, not by having a bunch of slides that I read to you, but by our conversations that lead us into discussions that are very real world and practical for you. And I'm hoping that in your future endeavors, you'll come back to these conversations time and again and find some help when you need it. Anyone else? Okay, well, I will see you in the morning, same time, same station, and we will try to get this week completed tomorrow, and then we have one more. Be sure you're working on your week's work. Don't wait till Sunday night. and do whatever you have to do to get it in. I continue to try to use Moodle. If Moodle doesn't work, one thing you can help me with, if you're going to email your stuff, if you could do the whole week's load in one email, that is really helpful. Just do your stuff and save it in a file, and then load it in one email and send it all to me at one time. That keeps my mailbox from being overwhelmed. And that will help me with grading as well. But I should hopefully have last week's graded and your grades back to you today. I'm working on that to get that done. Okay, are we all clear?
Yep, good.
Yeah.
All righty, we'll take care and have a good day, okay?
Yeah.
Everybody take care. Have a good day. Be safe.
You
You
too.
too.